So my brother Thomas joined the police force 5 years ago. He was 21 when he completed the police training academy in North Carolina. He was idealistic and optimistic. It may sound mundane, but he genuinely wanted to make a difference and improve people's lives. So I am going to share a story that he told me. One day, he was dispatched to check a house outside the city. When he arrived, a man was sitting on the steps to the front door, with his hands to his face. When he approached the man, he could see that he was crying. He identified himself as a police officer, and asked what was the nature of the emergency. The man between sobs murmured something like how awful it is. He continued to question the man, but he was inconsolable and incoherent. He could see that the man was traumatized. He called for paramedics and backups so he could enter the house. Another officer arrived on the scene, and Thomas drew his gun and entered the house. Not even past the threshold, he smelled a disgusting smell. It was nearly impossible to breathe, and he had to push his way into the smell that filled the house. Every square inch of space was packed with boxes, newspapers, and magazines. Thomas shouted, "Is anyone here?" There was only silence, but experience told him to be cautious. He kept his gun ready as he moved from room to room. Even though he had been in force for 5 years, his heart rate was very high. As he moved forward, he didn't encounter anyone in the first 2 rooms and went down a hall, where the smell was getting much more intense. At the end of the hall, there was a door that he suspected was the door to the master bedroom of the house. He opened the door, and the next thing he saw was 2 dead bodies lying on the ground and flies were roaming around them. For whatever reason, Thomas decided to investigate further. The first victim was male about 30 years of age and the second a female about 27 or 28. What's more terrifying was the female was holding a corpse of an infant child. Thomas stumbled and ran for the door. Outside he vomited and a paramedic gave him oxygen. It turned out that the man on the steps was an associate of the deceased man. They worked together, and when he hadn't shown up for work in several weeks, he went to the house to see what was up with him. He had been the first to come across the bodies. Very few people in the town knew the family. They lived boarded up in that old house. The women never went out, and the man only worked where few people interacted with him. The forensic determined the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. There was no maintenance on an ancient heating system within the house, and it took all 3 in their sleep. My brother has moved on and is in a different town. He had some difficulty sleeping and had therapy to cope with it. It has been years since that incident, and still, he says he have nightmares about the child. So I've been a police officer for a small town in Massachusetts for about 10 years. Overall, it's been a stressful, but rewarding job, not because of the pay, but because you know you're doing something right for your community. The town I worked for was a small town called Provincetown, which was one of those towns right on the beach beside the Cape. It had a population of around 3,000 people, and I'd normally never get any calls, as the town was known to be one of the safest. The most you'd ever get was the occasional robbery or casual break-in. But one night, I was on one of the creepiest and most unexplainable calls I've ever been on. This happened in April of 2021, where I had been monitoring the roadways. I had gotten a call about hearing screams coming from the beach. This was weird, as I've never gotten a call from the beach area. I had figured it was a report that someone had gotten bit by a shark and needed assistance. We get a lot of sharks that come around this time of year, and we would sometimes had to close off the beaches. Needless to say, I got dispatched over to the area of the beach where I had seen a bunch of people filming and pointing at something in the water. I got out of my patrol car and walked up to the people watching this thing in the water. From my perspective, it looked like a small buoy, but as it got closer, I came to the realization that it was the head of a person. The wave pushed the body in the shore, and it was the body of a man who appeared to be in his early 20s. There was no blood, no signs of hypothermia or anything that could hint as to how he died. In fact, it seemed like he'd been dead for at most a day or 2. I told everyone to step back while I performed CPR, but there was no pulse. After some time, the backup had arrived along with a detective. We had searched his jacket, and in one of the pockets, there was a small Ziploc bag. Inside, there was what looked to be a folded piece of paper. Once we unfolded it, we were all confused by what the text written in the page. It was all just a bunch of letters and symbols scrambled together on separate lines of the paper. We realized that what we were looking at was some sort of cipher. It looked like total confusing to the naked eye, but we knew there were people in the FBI who specialized in cracking codes and riddles. We obviously had to close the beach and even enforce a curfew of that section of Provincetown. The autopsy was performed on the body, but the creepy thing was that the autopsy couldn't identify as to what actually killed him. Eventually the town ruled his death as being natural causes from the ocean. Not too long after that, a lot of crazy rumors started to spread around the town. Some speculated that he had drowned, others believed he was murdered, and there were even some who thought it was done by evil. This led many people to believe that there was a serial killer in the town who lived by the beaches. Another theory was mentioned that this incident was somehow connected to the Lady of the Dunes case. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a similar case that occurred in the same town in the 70s. As far as I know, the FBI and forensic analysts have yet to crack this code, even with advanced computer programs. It's been a few years now in this case, and it still haunts me every time I think about it. More and more questions pop into my head about what really happened to him, and how he died. So I'm 48 years old male, and I've worked as a police officer in Alaska ever since I was 25. I love my job, and we never traded for anything. Like any occupation, it had its ups and downs, but this one call I received last March was by far the most horrifying experience I've ever had. I was on my nightly patrol around 8 p.m. when dispatch radioed that there was a 1090. Those who don't know what 1090 is, it is a code for an alarm in progress. I was the nearest unit to the address, so I headed over to see what was going on. It was reported that a silent alarm to a warehouse was set off. These types of calls were often pretty unpredictable, since about half of them were false alarms, like an employee accidentally setting off the alarm, while the other half could be a true break-in. I always treat every situation with caution, since I've learned over the years it's best to be ready for anything. I flipped on my lights and sped up, heading to the address. It was about 10 minutes away on a pretty quiet road with a few business that I was familiar with. Upon arrival, I pulled into the parking lot to see if there was any visible signs of forced entry. But everything looked good. I looped around the building, noticing 3 semi-truck trailers of the loading dock. I assumed that it was some sort of false alarm. The building looked like it was locked up for the day, so I waited right outside the main entrance until the owner was contacted. He said that there should be a janitor inside and that he would give him a call to let him know what was going on. I called for backup, since we generally tend to involve multiple officers in a situation like this for safety. After about 15 minutes, 3 backup units arrived. Now feeling more comfortable, I got out of the car along with another officer. We walked up to the front to peer through the window to see if anyone was inside. The owner still wasn't able to get a hold of the janitor, so he told us that he would bring a key. As we looked inside, we surprisingly noticed a man down the hallway and waved him down to come out. He came up to the front and introduced himself as the janitor. I radioed into dispatch to let the owner know that the janitor let us in and he wouldn't be needed. I explained the situation to him, and he seemed pretty shocked, telling me that he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. At that point, we were under the assumption that it was a false alarm, but we still wanted to do a quick round of the building to be sure. The janitor asked if he could get back to work, explaining that he had a lot of work to do. But we told him it could put him in danger if there was someone inside. So I asked him to wait on the bench. He seemed like a friendly guy, so we told him we'd make it quick. The building at the first level was mainly aisles of boxes and packaging. The second level was much smaller, but only had offices. We did a sweep through the first floor and didn't find anything, so we took the elevator up to the second floor. As it opened, we had to turn on our flashlight, since the nighttime lights in the hallway were very dim. We cleared the first 2 offices, being very cautious because we were in unfamiliar rooms with no lights. As we entered the third office, we found our first red flag. A large duffel bag was stuffed in the corner under the desk, filled with money and miscellaneous items. I assumed they were taken from the packaging boxes downstairs on the first floor. We called it in, asking for any more available units to come, since we were already possibly facing a robbery in progress. We finished searching the second floor, not finding anyone or anything else. I split up from my partner as it got off the elevator. He went to the front to question the janitor, while I went back into the main area to search for any clues. Strangely, I noticed a phone lying on the floor in the corner of the room. I picked it up and asked the janitor if it was his. He told me that it was, and I handed it to him. To verify, I asked if he could unlock the phone for me, but he started acting suspicious. After a brief pause, he told me that it wasn't his and explained that it was probably another worker's phone. I turned on the screen and saw that there were 5 missed calls and 1 voice message from boss. I instantly knew something was off, and detained the janitor because he should have been able to get into the phone if it was his. I put them in the back of my car and went back into the building and continued searching. I went back to the area where I found the phone and opened the garage leading to the back of the building. I saw the 3 semi-truck trailers from earlier and stepped outside towards them. At that moment, I heard a faint muffled screaming coming from the back of one of the trailers. I drew my gun and opened up the trailer. There I saw a man tied up in the corner wearing a pair of shorts. I cut him free and asked who he was. He told me that he was the janitor and some guy had snuck and attacked him. As he was coming back inside after taking trash out to the dumpster, the intruder took his uniform off and put it on. He then tied him up and threw him in the back of the trailer. I walked him to the front and handed him the phone. He was able to unlock it, proving his identity. We arrested the man who posed as a janitor and took him to jail. This incident happened 2 years ago, and still, I feel glad that I followed my instincts and continued to look when it originally sounded like it was a false alarm.